Though unfortunately in India in the 1950s there were no girls' teams, because if so, she certainly would have been a star athlete. Failing that, she could instead often be found secretly borrowing her cousin Sagar's bike and going for rides around the neighborhood. When Ruqayya Saeed was 16 years old, as the story goes, she was climbing up a tree. Her name, Ruqayya, means one who ascends, after all. And she was up in the tree when her cousin Asghar Ali, visiting from Pakistan to spend time with his cousins after the premature passing of his own mother, arrived at the house and spotted her high in its limbs. She saw him down there and climbed down, wiping her hands on her kurta, and greeted him, and I think the both of the two of them knew that their lives had just changed. It was the following year that Ruqayya's sisters, Jafri Saeed and Niloufar Saeed, had a double wedding with Asghar Ali's older brothers, Hadi and Dilawar Saeed. That's how you used to do it in the old country. And perhaps it was then that Asghar and Ruqayya began hatching their own plan. It was still the day of so-called arranged marriages, but Asghar and Ruqayya Ali had the rare and precious love match. 5 years later, the young married couple made plans to settle in London, where their older married siblings Hadi and Niloufar Saeed had already settled. And because India and Pakistan were in the middle of a political conflict, that wedding happened by proxy. In other words, yes, Dad was unable to obtain a visa to travel to his own wedding. Mom flew to Karachi to meet him, and they went on to London. In England, the newlyweds settled into their life, with Ruqayya Ali becoming a working girl, taking a position as a secretary at the Wonder Bread factory, before giving birth to their eldest daughter, Nahid, in 1968. Now, if anyone here has a hard time imagining Ruqayya Ali in 1960s London sporting a multicolored midi dress with a beehive hairdo, I'm not saying that there is photographic evidence, but I am also not saying there is photographic evidence. It was, after all, the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and so perhaps no one will be surprised to hear that Ruqayya Ali planned the birth of her next child, this guy talking to you right now, to happen at home and not at a hospital, attended not by doctors and nurses, but by a midwife. The kid, thankfully, arrived without incident, and soon enough the couple decided that it was time to return to India for their long, long delayed Valima. Poor Kazim, just coming into language, ended up in a household where multiple languages, including English, Urdu, Farsi, Telugu, and Tamil, were all spoken, and he ended up jumbling them all together into a mixture of tongues that became his first language. It is likely that he never recovered. When only the ladies are laughing. When the family followed Asghar's work to Canada, they were joined by many of their siblings. My mom's next older sister, Nadira, already lived in the States, but soon relocated to Manitoba, and they were followed in short order by Turab and Najma Saeed, along with Hadi and Niloufar Saeed, and the following year by Jafri and Dilawar Saeed. And soon enough, her younger brothers, Safdar and Iftikhar, also joined, and her beloved friend and cousin and bike-owning friend, Sagar Razvi, lived not too far away in Madison, where he was studying for his PhD. In other words, our family houses in Winnipeg imitated those old neighborhoods in India. We lived in houses down the street and around the corner from each other. We were cousins, but we were raised like brothers and sisters to each other. Even after our family moved north to the town of Genpeg, we tried to see the family as often as possible, and many of the family drove up there to see us too. What I didn't realize then is that our extended family was a family that had been driven apart by both the political forces of the partition of India, when many people in the family moved to Pakistan, but also economic forces that scattered us across continents, from India to Europe, some to the Middle East, and then to North America, to Canada, and to the United States. And whenever new cousins would arrive, sometimes it would have been years or even decades since Mom had seen them last, and it gave her the greatest pleasure to see those long absent loved ones reappear in our lives. When in Genpeg, Ruqayya Ali stayed busy. By days, she studied in a correspondence course on diet and nutrition, a career later pursued by her daughter, Dr. Nahid Ali Saeed, as well as working as a substitute teacher in the school. Before Farah, my younger sister, and I were in school ourselves, we always had a great time with our mom doing her morning yoga routine, along with a 12-inch vinyl record and accompanying fold-out poster giving directions for all the positions. And occasionally, if we were well behaved, she would put on a record she had with an accompanying fold-out poster that taught you how to do all the latest disco moves. When we relocated to the States, she continued her career as an educator, working with ESL students at Casey Middle School and with students for students with learning difficulties. She would often record the novels they were supposed to read on tapes and play back to listen to. Occasionally, she would recruit me to recite certain chapters, but I would always try to act out the parts for the different characters' voices and do their accents instead of just reading the dialogue. So usually she would have to re-record the chapters that I did. Sorry, Mom. In those early years, she also kept busy with childcare for various of the working women in our neighborhood. There were always children in our houses. I remember Erica Taylor, a small Indian girl named Monica, and other kids as well. And she became friends with the various of the South Asian women who lived in our neighborhood, like Prem Thakur, who lost her own daughter around the same time that Mom lost her dad, Sajjad Saeed, and so they became friends through that shared experience of grief. There was Mamta Bhargava, who used to host the most epic New Year's Eve parties, but most especially my mom's bestie, Sadhna Gupta, who lived down the street from us. And when my mom's beloved brother Thorab passed away, it was Auntie Sadhna who came to our house immediately and took care of all of us while Mom got on a plane to Winnipeg. Those early days in Western New York were full of community building. There was a Sunni mosque, but for Shia families, we had to find each other. And in the early years, we would even drive to St. Catharines or Burlington, and sometimes even to Toronto for the majlises. There were families here and there in the United States, including the Hassans in Medina and the Kimjis who lived on Grand Island, and another family of Joffreys who lived in Lewiston, and another family of Joffreys who lived in our neighborhood and were our friends growing up. And in those days, the majlises were always in people's houses. And the day before, you had to move all the furniture out of the living room into the dining room, and there was a whole set of white sheets that you had to spread out on the floor, and there was a lot of masking tape involved. The sound systems were basic, the nohas were heartfelt, and nobody sang a better marsiya or with more devotion than Ruqayya Ali. Like both of her elder sisters, Niloufar Saeed and Joffrey Saeed, Ruqayya was college educated. Her father insisted on this point. As the father of 3 sons and 5 daughters, Sajjad Saeed was what might be considered in contemporary terms a feminist. He did insist that his daughters pursue their education and fully supported his daughter Niloufar when she refused to marry until she completed not only her undergraduate degree but also her medical degree. So that was not a very normal thing to happen in those days. But in fact, our mom, Ruqayya, was a lifelong learner. In 1967, before her marriage, she received her BSc in Home Economics from Andhra Pradesh Agricultural University, and it was 19 years later that she got her associate's degree in accounting, and 12 years after that that she received her MBA from Canisius College. She did have a leadership role among the community of Muslim women in Western New York, often hosting events and providing advice and guidance. She would very good-naturedly complain to me that while all the men referred to my father as Asghar Bai, all the women habitually referred to her as Ruqayya Auntie. And above all, and it may be controversial to say, but it is the truth, my mom liked to have fun. She loved parties, she loved talking with her nephews and nieces, she loved the singing and the dancing at the weddings, even though she did not dance herself. Well, she would if there was only ladies, she would dance. And she never, if she could help it, missed a wedding. She could cook, she could sew, she could plan a party for 100 people at the drop of a hat. She was always trying something new, whether it was gardening, interior decorating, or macrame. She was, as my cousin said, famous for stitching the pillowcases. She even experimented with ceramics, and she might have even sewed a wizard's robe or two for me to wear during Dungeons and Dragons games. When I announced her passing on the Facebook group for people who had once lived in the town of Genpeg, many of the women wrote in to express condolences and share stories about how Mom had taught them sewing and macrame. So if you live in Winnipeg and you still have a macrame owl or wall hanging or table lying around your house all these decades later, you know who to thank. Anyhow, anyone who knew Mom knew how much she loved fashion and clothes, even after she adopted a more traditional dress code, including long sleeves and hijab, but she did always want to be stylish, and she was. In advance of the weddings, she would take great care selecting her outfits and the jewels and the headscarves that she would wear, and she even wrote to me after my nephew Zane's wedding requesting that I delete certain photographs that I had posted. "I don't think I look very nice in those ones," she said, referring to particular pictures that I naturally did delete. Much has been said about her kind disposition, and it is true. And in fact, my cousin Akbar just said to you, nobody ever saw her get upset or lose her temper. Well, my friend, I was her son, and so I beg to differ. In all seriousness, she was a passionate woman of strong beliefs, and she was not afraid to express them. A true son of her father, she often shared opinions on political and social issues strongly and passionately, and it does give me some small measure of gladness imagining her pleasure at the recent indictment and arrest of Donald Trump, which would have given her great pleasure. As everyone knows, our house was an open home. People were always coming through, being fed, staying over, and frequently we would have people staying in our house for weeks or even months. My cousin Oscar moved in during the early years of his law school, and often students from the university would come for dinner or to stay for the weekend. I particularly remember Sabiha Ali, who became a professor of English at a college in Hyderabad, and Dr. Amar Torabi, along with many others, including this one time when my mom and dad showed up from an airport run with an Indian couple and their young son who were not related to us at all. They just had a long layover, and so Mom brought them home for dinner, and when it was time for their flight, Dad drove them back to the airport. There was always room in her house, and there was always a space at her table. Her losses were many. Her father passed in 1980, and her brother only a few years later, and her sister in 1997. And despite all these losses, I think she was probably most affected by the loss of her sister, Shafa Hussain, last year. She always tried to be available for her family. When her dear sister-in-law, Shahnaz Saeed, was contending with cancer, Mom drove up every single weekend to Oakville to spend time with her and to nurse her and to help the kids take care of her. The 5 daughters of Sajjad and Zahra Saeed were legendary beauties. At the weddings, everyone was always asking them to pose, left to right, oldest to youngest. And I still remember that after one such photo, I think it was at Akbar and Tabasum's wedding in 1992, my mom actually seemed upset. And I went over to her and I asked her what was going on, and she said, "I don't like it when people ask us to take these sister photos because Najma and Shahnaz are sisters too, and they should be included." Though Najma Auntie lived in Winnipeg and had health issues that prevented her from attending a lot of family gatherings, the 5 sisters never took another picture again without her sister Shanu alongside them. As Nahid and then Farah got married, Ruqayya took the greatest pleasure in her grandchildren, teaching Alina all her recipes and taking great pride in the accomplishments of her other grandchildren, and was so happy to be at the wedding of her grandson Zain. Every single one of the grandchildren imagined themselves as her favorite, and the funny part is they were probably all right. She did enjoy traveling, often visiting Farah in Florida, but also going on family cruises, visiting family in India, once stopping over in France to visit her beloved cousin Mohsin and his wife Catherine, whom she had a very soft spot for, as well as going on safari in East Africa while visiting friends there for a wedding. Everywhere she went, she made friends, and even though she loved company, at the end of the day, every single one of us, including all 3 children, knew that her favorite person in the whole world was her husband, Asghar Ali. None of us knew that the last month of her life would be the last month of her life. But she spent it exactly the way she would have wanted to spend it, even if she knew it was. She spent it with her family. Her son Kazim came to visit for the weekend, and they spent days together talking and walking. She went to visit dear family in Maryland, where she saw all the cousins from the old neighborhood, including Safia and Khala and Shahida Khala, whom she had not seen for many long years. And she spent time with her grandchildren, and she spent the last day of her life exactly as she would have wished, in the company of her husband, shopping and planning for the future. The last time I talked to my mom was about 3 days before she passed. And at the end of the phone call, I said to her, "You're the only mom I ever would have wished for in the world." And she said back to me, "You are the only son I ever would have wished for in the world." When we heard she lost consciousness, we raced from all corners of the country to be with her. Family and friends gathered in the hospital to hold her hand and talk to her. We spoke to her and recited the Quran and du'as for her. Her sisters Niloufar, Saeed, and Nadra Ali Khan came, and as the day waned and dusk came on, the family left, and only Nahid, Kazim, and Farah, and Zahid and Maysam sat around the bed, holding her hands and holding each other's hands. She had always told us that she did not want to die in the hospital, but to die at home. And the truth is that she left us that day at the house. It was only her body that lived on, but it was a body we had loved so much, her smile and her beauty, her soft, kind hands. As the sky darkened, the three of us knew that the time had come to let her go, and so we let her go. My cousin Sana had posted on Facebook just the previous week about her own mother, Shana Saeed, whose death anniversary had just passed, and I wrote this comment on Sana's post. "So here's the amazing thing. Last night, I had a dream about your mom. I was in my house in California, and she showed up, and she sat on the couch, and I sat beside her, and I put my head in her lap, and she said, 'Okay, tell me all about what's going on.' And I told her about things, and then I said, 'What's going on with you?' And she said, 'Oh, well, it's been really busy. There's a lot going on.'" And I loved that idea, that Janet was busy, that people have things to do. She said, "I do check in on you now and then." And I said, "Only now and then?" And she said, "Oh no, it's okay. Time is different here. I don't really miss anything. I just come back to the part where I left off before." So I said, "Well, we all miss you." And she laughed and said, "Okay, well, I'll see you later." But she didn't actually leave. She just stayed there until I woke up from the dream. That was the Facebook post I put on the week before Mom passed. So imagine that even time might work differently in that other world where our loved ones have gone. I'm not sure what you believe, but I have learned to pay attention to my dreams. And in the days since my mom has passed, I have dreamed many times about my Auntie Najma and my Auntie Shanu, and many times, and once about my Joffrey auntie and my Thurab uncle, but I have not had any dreams of my mom. I imagine that she is busy, and I haven't had any dream of my Auntie Shafa Hussein. I think that wherever my mom is, whatever she is doing, I think Auntie June is there with her, helping her through. We knew that Mom's love would never die. We knew her joy and kindness would be eternal. Dear Ruqayya Ali, live on in your next life in peace. We love you, we miss you, and please, please, by the grace of God, we can only pray and hope that someday we will see you again in the garden of paradise.